Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, I got the SFK gang back with me with a special guest. I got Lisa, I got JJ Vance, and I got BD Salerno. And special guest we got going with us today is Jim Smith. Some people may know of him as working with William Ramsey. He has done some work with him with the Austin drowning cases. And I do know that there is a lot of those, and a lot more than we covered in our SFK series. So, if possible, maybe we will get into some other new cases, but maybe we'll even talk about some of the stuff that he's come across with some of the cases we covered in the past. But this should be definitely interesting, and some new things should be. Jim has other things that he has looked at that we didn't. So I think this should make a definitely interesting episode. Before we get into it, I do want to let at least JJ and BD promote their stuff. I mean, you already know who Lisa is. She's the mad scientist, co-host of the Occult Rejects. And we got JJ, host of Operation GCD. JJ, let everybody know where they can find your amazing work as well.
JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD. Nick, Lisa, appreciate the invite back. BD, great to always have a conversation with you on your. Always enjoy your work and your analysis of your side of the true crime genre with the unique take you look at it in. And Jim, great to meet you. Finally meet you. We've been back and forth on Twixter for the past 7 or so years and talking smiley face killer activity. So great to meet you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for having me, guys. Nice to meet you too. Nice to finally get to see you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for jumping on, JJ. And BD.
Oh, absolutely.
If you can, sorry, I'm coughing. Let everybody know like some of the books and really whatever you want to plug and other shows that you've been on besides this one.
Wow. Well, the books have really long titles, so I will refer everybody to BD Salerno on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. There's 5 books, 2 on forensic astrology, 1 on a crime investigation I did over a period of 3 years, 1 on the occult aspects of that crime. And the 5th one, just for fun and giggles, is my memoir. And I think my link tree will be below. Everything can be found there. And I can be found at Star Sleuth on Twitter and BD Salerno 21 on Instagram. And thank you again for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, of course. And you were also on, I know you were on Jin's show not too long ago.
Yeah. I was on Jin's. That episode's going to drop any day now. I've been on Daniel End of Days Radio. I've been on, good grief, drawing a blank here, but I've done some other stuff with Daniel, and I did Black Box Radio a while ago on the crime case. And that's about it. I mostly work with you guys, which is absolutely delightful, and I love it.
So do I. That's why I keep asking you back. Thank you. I appreciate it for real. And Jim, finally to you. Besides, I guess, like William Ramsey, I mean, we all know who he is. I'm sure most of my listeners do too. Besides working with him with the Austin stuff, was there anything that you kind of maybe wanted to mention or plug or, highlight?
No, Nick, thanks for having me on again. It's nice to just talk to people that care about these cases and, are actually doing something about them. I personally think I'm a little biased, but think that this is the one of the biggest problems our country faces. Just the severity and how the violence of these crimes that, most people don't even think is happening. So no, I just wanted to just answer any questions and meet with you guys. I've been a fan. I'm a fan of the work you guys do on these cases. And my Twitter, if anybody's interested, is Smiley Face Cult at Drowning Victims on Twitter. I post cases of that I think are connected as men go missing or afterwards. And I try to put them all in one place so people can understand them, people who have never heard of this stuff and can see for themselves. I feel like that's super important because local media is able to gloss over these crimes.
Yeah, for real. Before we, I guess, get going, I did want to ask, I guess, how did you get even into this? You know, like what was there like a specific thing that caught your eye, a specific case? Was it a few things that eventually you started like scratching your head and you're like, what's going on here? Just wondering if you don't mind.
No. That's a great question. True story. I learned about this out of college, living in Minneapolis for 2 months, and they were having these cases. This is like 2004. They were having many of these cases, and I had seen a couple. I had been to a part of Minnesota where this had happened multiple times, and it caught my attention. And then something else happened. I'm a big sports fan, and the week before, the Packers played the Giants to go to the Super Bowl. The year the Giants won the Super Bowl, the offensive coordinator's son for the Packers, Joe Philbin, his son was abducted and was a victim. And they announced it on Sports Center at 9:00 in the morning, and I was watching it with my wife. And Linda Cohn explained very calmly that people had heard Mr. Philbin's son screaming for help, and that he had disappeared after a party, and that he was found in the river the next day. And anyway, this was at the time that Detective Gannon was attacked, and people stopped. The FBI put out their public piece about the drownings weren't real. And I felt that I had to be compelled, and I really wasn't doing much yet. But then the drownings started happening where I'm from in Atlanta, in Georgia, at as much of a pace as it's happening in Austin. And I was the only person covering it. And I covered it with the local media from about the 7th victim on. And there's about 50 young men who have been murdered in the metro area. In fact, people think I know y'all have heard about the Lake Lanier murders. The Lake Lanier murders are the smiley face Georgia murders. And the increase in the drownings and bodies that they found went up 4 straight years at this time. And it wasn't because there were more drownings. There were more murders, and these are all young men. So I decided to use Twitter to try to go around the media and attack the narrative myself and get involved and find evidence myself. And it's much easier than people think. It's just that no one's looking.
You know, JJ, I'm pretty sure you brought that up to me a few times, didn't you?
Yeah, we've talked about it a number of times, actually. We talked about it relative to the subject of the SFK victims, referencing some conversations I had with Jim in the past, because as he communicated to me in years past, that was a hot spot for Georgia activity. And he's right. I mean, the cases there are quite astounding. We've also talked in relative to the Atlanta child murder. Some of the victims of the Atlanta child murders were last seen on Lake Lanier on a boat.
Yeah, Wayne Williams. Yeah, there are more murders now that I think involved with whoever is doing this in Georgia than ever Wayne Williams. Way more. And I mean, these aren't cases that if any one of y'all read, you wouldn't think, that's probably just an accident. Nope. No. Murders. I have autopsies. I have evidence. I found graffiti at a couple crime scenes myself that I went to. And every single place that I found a smiley graffiti in Georgia, the victim called a loved one and hung up abruptly, and that was their last call. It was a butt dial or every single place that I found. And there are some of the biggest cases in Georgia, most famous, are these cases. Justin Gaines was number 1. He's still never been found. I have a lot of information about him. There's been some other pretty big name, high profile cases in Georgia, that Kelly Nash on Lake Lanier. That's another one. Anyway, forgive me. I don't want to ramble on, but that's why I started doing this, because no one else was doing it. And I just couldn't sit back and watch it happen and not do anything. And I tried to warn the police. I've tried to warn reporters, and everybody's very scared. They privately will tell you, of course, they see what we see, but the statistics driving crime and law enforcement really hinders this. Like you were saying, JJ, police aren't going to change a narrative for an accident. When someone is found in the water, it is a recovery. It is not an accident scene. People are not going to change an accident into a murder that's supposed to look like a drowning, especially when the innuendo or a smear of alcohol or drugs is involved. So a crime statistics is driving this being ignored. at least part of it.
No, that's a very sound assessment, Jim, because it's definitely political. Especially the things that are playing out in Austin right now. Some of the local coverage I've been paying attention to over the duration of time that these murders have been occurring down there in Austin has been very much everyone's keeping it hush hush, even within the local scene. Even there's a guy YouTuber that's done a lot of videos. I believe he's even interviewed Kevin Gannon, Detective Gannon from the retired detective from the NYPD, who literally wrote the book and has set the standard as far as trying to understand these crimes. I believe he's even appeared on that YouTube channel as well down there in Austin, kind of discussing just the political elements and how no one wants to pay attention to it. And that's true, because there's no political benefit for any politician or even police chief as political, or sheriff as political as they are. Obviously, they're not necessarily looked at as political, but those are political positions. And no one benefits from bringing these up. And that's really one of the problems with the crime statistics is they're not identifying them as crimes, and it's never going to show up as a statistic in which to exhibit there being a problem. So a lot of this is still going under the radar, but you can kind of see the machinations of the political scene. I'm sure Lisa probably has a better visibility on some of that, being more local to the Texas or Austin, Texas area. So there's just these are the things that are still playing out for what now 20 years in these cases. No one in politics wants to touch these cases. I think there's much to be said to that. I have a lot of my own theories relative to how these crimes are being perpetrated and why those things aren't being talked about from more of a spooky National Security Council type operation nature, with more of an Operation Gladio type situation. I think there's a lot to be said along those lines. That delves into the occult aspects of what I think these crimes really are: a ritual human sacrifice. Those two worlds do meet. Strangely enough, they meet way too frequently and way too high levels of power in this country for anything good to come from that. But I think there's a number of these factors that are weighing into these political machinations, what no one wants to talk about. But I think Austin right now is playing out right now, like presently.
Yeah. I think Texas in general, because you have Corpus Christi now popping up, and
you
hear some of the stuff going on, the murmurings going on in Houston and Dallas and San Antonio. San Antonio is one that I believe has a significant amount, but no one is covering, no one's talking about them. There's really very little being reported on some of these from San Antonio. So you don't even know that they're occurring, just because they're not even making a blip on the news, unless you know someone that had this person, unfortunately, and like that. In terms of with Austin, to JJ's point, it almost feels like, in terms of the pulse in Austin, when you hear about how universities will have a high rape crime incidents, right?
Sure.
And nobody wants to report it because nobody wants to stop the enrollment, right? They don't want to prevent or take a hit to their enrollment if they start releasing all the amount of rape allegations or rape, things coming to the surface. And it almost feels that way in Austin, because so much money is being generated. The tourism is through the roof with Austin. It always kind of has been, but now even more so. And it's astronomical, the amount of money that's being made, especially with some of these festivals. And we were talking a little bit off camera, how much money is being made. And so I could see why nobody wants to say anything, because it would take a financial hit. But at the same time, you cannot ignore what is happening because of the frequency and the level of frequency that is happening at.
Yeah.
I don't know if I said it on the show. Maybe I said it to you, someone here, off not recording. In Austin, from what I got out of it, and again, I didn't go crazy with those places. But a lot of those bars and a lot of those entertainment companies, when you start looking at stuff, a lot of them start to kind of move up and kind of end up just owned by probably a handful of people, maybe 6 people probably own most of the entertainment shit down there. If you were kind of involved, you kind of have the city by its balls, I think, in a sense. Where it's you want to lock us up, but you're also going to devastate the economy. Go for it.
No, good point. It's breathtaking. Austin's like the perfect storm right now because they had to defund the police.
Yep.
And now they have, a DA that doesn't really respect the rule of law. Okay, this is not a political statement, so please don't read into whatever I'm saying. These are just facts. And crime has skyrocketed. They have not gotten anything under control. And these people in Austin, they're just having their way. And
what if it is actually connected to we think big tech? That's
I think something like that.
That's what's running that state, and then Austin is that little area. You got the bars that's bringing in all the money. You have so many people that are keeping money flowing in there. Kind of fuck you.
It's a definite coordinated event for sure. And with the whole defunding the police, Jim, it's funny because again, if I had not lived there, then I would not even believe this. But yes, there was the defunding of the police in that they did not get the budget that they were supposed to get.
Right.
But eventually they got the money. They just never rehired the vacancies that had been created because from what I understood was that they stopped with the police academy. So they didn't have any more incoming to replace the positions that were open. Because of the defunding that did happen initially, you had so many people either promote or early retire. So now you had even more vacancies on top of the fact that you were understaffed. And so that money got reappropriated for, I don't know, mental health or whatever it was. And a majority of, from what I understood, some of the reappropriation of the money as a whole for the city of Austin, some of the siphoning happened among EMS to PD. And so it kind of went into a larger pot, but it kind of got moved over, so to speak. So to say that they are hurting for money, I don't know that you know what I mean?
Oh, I don't think that.
Right. But at the same time, on the surface level, they complied with all of what was happening in all of these, and forgive me, all these liberal driven cities to where, they also defunded as well.
Right.
But they never supplemented the vacancies, and almost on purpose. It almost
I agree.
Crime strike. Yeah.
It undermines the whole core of law enforcement. No, you're exactly right. The same things happen here in Atlanta. This is not connected to the murders in Georgia, but it's undermined police's ability to do their job. Obviously, nationwide, that's why violent crime has spiked. Police are scared to do their jobs because of cameras, and I feel like. What's going on in Austin. I mean, you guys have gone through 2 police chiefs now. The writing's on the wall. I mean, they just can't. There's not enough people who want to do the job for the money they're paying that they can just go out and fill in these shortages in law enforcement. And the criminals know this, and they are feasting, and they love it, and they're laughing at people. I mean, I'm not sure if y'all know or saw this on my Twitter, but they dropped a body right in front of Lady Bird on a Friday, right in front of City Hall.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, this is like a month ago. And somebody who's a friend there sent me a picture of the deceased young man. And police tried to say that it was a heart attack at first, and we busted them in a lie. And this literally happened, and they were tripping over themselves. The City Hall police, they were furious. I mean, they're literally mocking City Hall and government by doing that on a Friday, and then watching them chase their tail and try to make excuses. The same thing just happened this week to the man who's missing, and they just found the body over by Lady Bird, by the flower place. They have not announced who that was. They know who that was, but they won't announce it. They're playing games.
Yes. And it's so populated in that area. Somebody saw something. Or somehow they evaded detection because, and Nick has always brought this up, and this is very clever, whether it is maintenance, whether it is the Rotary Club, but somebody that's supposed to be there or has a uniform or has equipment that you wouldn't even think to look twice.
I still think the golf course area is a great place to do it too. Half of your site is gone. I guarantee you a lot of it's right over there.
All great points.
Yeah, but this fell in that Jim mentioned in Austin. This was a middle of the day type situation on a Friday, right? I mean, there was folks earlier that day that confirmed that body was not present there earlier that morning, but then all of a sudden it was dumped there. The police initially, as you said, tried to claim it was some sort of heart attack. I believe later they changed that to a suicide with a gun, right? But there was no gun to be found. Or
That's exactly right. No gun was to be found. And the sickest part of all of it, the kid was a cancer survivor.
Sure.
You know, I mean, how hard you had to work to beat cancer. And
sure.
This is part of it. I've seen that too. There was a case in Houston that there was a kid at the Ronald McDonald Hospital, and his parents were there, and his dad went out to supposedly get a cigarette and went to a bar, and he disappeared, and he wound up in the Riverwalk there. And just again, like while the kid was having a life-saving operation. I mean, just
sure.
These people are vicious. And they're not going away. Like, that's the thing. We can sit here and talk about Austin. The bodies are going to continue. They're continuing, and there doesn't seem to be plan. They can't even say what this is out loud.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And, you know, to your point about dropping it off in the middle of the day, even on a Friday, if I wanted to go running on the trail, it would literally take me 30 minutes from the entrance into the park to even find an actual parking spot because of how many people are out there. It's extremely populated.
That body was colored, you know, had been multiple days of decomposition, and to sit there and pretend like that body was there the whole time right in front of City Hall, like no, that's, come on, you're insulting our intelligence.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just wish they would be honest. I mean, it's so dangerous. I wouldn't want to go out in Austin right now if I was a man. I really would not. You know, and again, y'all know some of the victims' families like I do, and I'm not sure if y'all have seen some of the autopsies, but there's victims that have severe trauma, have been in Austin. I mean, the guy that just survived on the same bridge as, oh, absolutely. I'm the only person who's ever talked to Christian. I can say that now, but I talked to him, and I talked to him after it happened because I saw the article about them fishing him out of the Colorado River, and they didn't know why, and I knew immediately. So I started messaging him and saying, hey, I know what happened to you. You were almost murdered. I want to talk to you. And he opened up to me, and I can prove this. He's gone underground. I don't know if I think somebody needs to try to talk to his dad, but he was on Rainy Street, and they were looking. He was dumped in the river. They dumped him. He had like $100,000 worth of medical bills. He is a big piece of the puzzle that no one really seems to want to go investigate, and I know they're scared, and they should be.
And he was the last one before the big break before COVID.
Was he? I don't remember that.
Yes, he was the last one in 2019, and then COVID hit, and they didn't resume back until 2022.
That's interesting. It did slow down a lot during COVID, but there were some victims during COVID, but definitely not as much. Definitely not as much. No, you're right. I'm not just saying about Austin. I'm just saying in general, and that's a great point. I haven't heard many people bring that up. You know, we sat during COVID and watched intently, like we always do, and wondering what's happening.
You know what I thought was interesting, and I did mention this. I do know for the OTO and at least Masons, because I had friends in Masonry, you know, those things were closed for a good part of COVID. They pretty much sided with the CDC. So I know we did point out like possible Lions Club or Rotary Club being involved. Now, if they were closed down, maybe you wanted to wait until they're open back up again.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just kind of the way I looked at all that, the lack of victims during the COVID shutdown time was, you know, the bars are not open, the sporting events are not open, the concerts are not open. Then you don't have plausible deniability for why these victims disappear drunk, because you don't have a circumstance in which they're going out and being drunk.
Oh,
so I think that's a big factor in all that. They didn't have that ability to write it off during that time. That's the way I looked at it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. Very interesting.
You say you're muted.
Sorry about that. I will say that in Austin, there were bars, especially on Rainy Street, that were being defined and they were being cited for being open. And so you did have, not all of them, but some of them. And one that was defiant was one that Nick covered, that Unbar Believable, which we covered as well.
Yeah.
And that was notorious for people getting roofied, or at
Yeah,
least being accused of that.
And that is the one that you did mention that Jason Honey's family has a lawsuit against.
Jonathan Honey. Yeah.
Interesting.
So they're being sued. Yeah. Did you hear about that, Jim?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think a lot of these families are. I think that's what's next for Riley Strain's family.
Sure.
In fact, it's already been, the precedent's already been set. Shane Montgomery, he was a victim in Philadelphia a few years ago. I covered it when it happened. He was a national story like Riley Strain. His family sued the bar and won, even though the bar, in my opinion, wasn't responsible. But that's how these families are going after people, because they don't know who to blame. Really, they probably should be suing, law enforcement more. Yeah, more than in the bars. Although I will say that I'm not talking about Luke 32. You can sue them. So
did they ever make a determination? Is that where he got Riley Strain was shot that text message out that he drunk something funky? It's one of the bars, because I know there was at one point in time a question which bar it was.
Yeah, no, I remember seeing that. They never were able to confirm anything. I know they got the bill from all the time where he had been, but I still believe that the reason why he was thrown out so fast, because they knew whatever he was given that has a time limit on it, and they were in a rush. And I think it was at Luke 32, and that to me, that's where all the smoke is.
Sure. Well, it's definitely where that local was, right? There was like a local that was hanging out there that targeted Riley and told the bouncers that he had to go.
Yeah, it was a woman.
Yeah, it was a woman, right?
It's a woman, yeah. And again, people know who she is. I don't think she's been investigated. There have to be cameras at the bar that they haven't released. There's so much going on there in that case. And again, the city is scared to death, and they're doing everything they can to dodge and mislead.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have a lot of ideas of how that whole scene was the whole discovery scene. I feel like there's a lot of like social engineering going on around the true crime community, as far as all these individuals in the Riley Strain discovery of his credit card, his debit card.
Yep.
Those people just happen to know the individual with the smiley face phone cover, who just happened to appear at the press conference right as they're having this no notice press conference on the discovery of Riley Strain's body, nowhere near, not directly near downtown or anything. So where he disappeared. So these people all knowing each other, these TikTokers, and a lot of questions surrounding how all that transpired, and how that was really, why all these people know each other, and what they were really up to as far as the quote unquote discoveries of Riley Strain.
No, a lot of interesting. Riley's case was like nothing I've ever seen.
Very unique.
Yeah, definitely not over yet, because I do think that his family is gearing up for a fight. Sure, sounds like it.
Good.
So
yeah, they need
good
to.
for them. Yeah, no, for sure. It's really tragic how people are treated, and how much work that families have to go through. And that's like the number one thing for that Detective Gannon tells families, is that they need a second autopsy. You cannot rely on the state.
Jim, speaking of autopsies, have you looked much into some of these MEs by any chance? Like their histories?
As far as, and you asked me about Jonathan Honey, I didn't answer. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. We can always come back to that. That's fine. In terms of some of these MEs, especially out of Travis County, the one that was there before, prior to this one that's here, they went on to Lubbock, and then they faced a few litigations brought against them for illegally transport of organs to their lab facility that is owned by them in California. And then I believe they also were being sued for falsifying autopsies, as well as misreporting and documenting on other types of autopsies. So it almost, and this was in Lubbock, so it almost begs the question of like, what were they doing in Travis County? Because I mean, this isn't the first time that you start doing this up in Lubbock. And the other thing is that the actual person or mentor that they were under in, I believe in, what is it, mortuary, not mortuary school, but in ME school, was the current ME there now in Travis County. And
Interesting.
and prior to that, the actual ME that was there was from Ohio. And so once I guess he was done pretty much taking over the guy that was there before, who was even way worse than what we've seen here recently, he went back to Ohio, which I believe is adjacent to some of the counties where some of these Ohio victims have been found.
Wow, I've never seen that or never heard that. I would love to see something on paper. Right.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
This
And
time.
there's a lot of, the court cases. I believe most of the court cases have been dismissed against these two MEs out of Lubbock. But it was very, very unusual situation with that. And you look to see, okay, where did they work? And you're like, wait, they were in Travis County this whole time. And so it was kind of at the height of it. And it's, it kind of is one of those things where you start to question a lot of, what's going on with all that. But I wanted to ask you, in terms of cases in Austin, did you ever hear any, or have you looked into, it was 2 cases that came up, and I know that there's been multiple cases that have come up, and, some have been identified, some have not been identified, but I found it unusual that all of a sudden after Jason Honey, that whole happened in April, you also had almost on the heels of it, 15 days later, the disappearance and discovery of John Christopher Hayes Clark, which was an African-American male. And then you had Mogadogel, who was also African-American, which they are not associating with it as a smiley face because I don't know, I guess underweight, young, too young, or they think that it was gang related or what have you. Did you hear anything, or I guess to me, the MO changed because of the ethnicity and the race. And you had never seen that before. Now, I don't know with these unidentified bodies, because there's about equal amounts of unidentified bodies as they are to the identified bodies, if any of them were of African-American descent. And what do you think, or what care to speculate on, what do you think happened in terms of the MO changing?
That's a great question. I think that it was after around Hunt for Justice came on television which was on cable. I forget. It was Detective Gannon and Professor Gilbertson. They did a bunch of cases, and it was just a couple years ago. And at that time, it was still mostly white men, but after that time, there was a huge influx of African American looks like victims, right? That people, and like Jelani Day was another Chicago victim. Jelani Day, his mom's really mad. He was a very articulate, educated black man from college and had everything going. Look, he just was black. He just doesn't look like a white. But there has been an influx of different minorities that seem to be being targeted, not just like frat kids. African exchange students, very smart African young men, right? Also Indian, Hindu young men like Mr. Honey. Other places, I mean, I can name multiple Hindu, Indian young men, smart, same deal, but they are definitely being targeted. Why more so than others? I don't know. I mean, we see some black victims, some Hispanic victims, some Asian victims, really all nationalities. Now, the main majority, white young men, at a certain weight, right? It's usually not big guys. These are guys that can be under 180 usually, and that's because they're easier to carry. But I think Austin is a perfect example of what this is these days, is that it's not just a white frat boy. If you look at the victims list, and I'm not saying every victim that was been found in Lady Bird Lake is connected, but every missing man that's been found in Lady Bird Lake, especially since the press and the media are working so hard to deny this, I feel like has to be connected, especially with all the hoopla and the attention going around. And for instance, also, there's a spot in Lady Bird that's had 6 bodies in the same spot. That's not an accident. 5 of them were men, one of them is a woman, and the last victim was a woman. And Professor Gilbertson talks about in his book about something called expansion diffusion. And it's where the people doing this will pick victims possibly that don't look like the young white male that everybody's waiting to see what's happening. And it'll be like an elderly person or somebody that normally you just like, oh, no, that was just a drowning. You see, nothing's happening down there. Those black kids just died too, along with those white kids, right? And then that's a way of justifying it, where really the people who are doing it are still murdering the same amount of number of people.
Right.
Just
Right.
The same thing. For instance, I'll quit rambling on, but the same thing happened at the salt shed in Chicago. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with the salt shed or the murders, but there were 3 victims. 2 of them were young white men leaving concerts from the salt shed, and the third was an elderly black man, where found in the same place. His car was missing, and you wouldn't even think that he could be connected, but it's the same crime. And I feel like they just did more victims. We just noticed 2, right? And
Sure.
people who are stuck in the early 2000s smiley face theory that it's all white college kids, that's evolved. This is something totally different, bigger. Same people, same organization. It's just different, right? And they moved. It's bigger. It's grown.
Sure. I think that is part of it. It has grown, and I think it's these different cells that operate slightly different, and they target slightly different victims. As far as different factors in that, and that comprise the purposes for having different victims and different cells. I think, and one of those is just the demographic makeup of a city. So, for example, like Boston has more Asian residents, so you're going to see a higher propensity of Boston victims being Asian.
I would 100% agree with that. For sure.
Jim, have you ever wondered? Can I want to go?
Go ahead. No, go.
Have you ever wondered if maybe some of these? I guess I could ask all of you. Maybe might be like I don't want to necessarily say they're initiations, but like, could they be something that went wrong, and then we're like, oh, now we're just gonna like kind of just dump the body. You know what I'm saying? Like, it may not even have meant to been like a killing, but it's just a way to dispose of the body.
Too many bodies. And why bring the body back to the same place that's already been searched so many times if it was just an accident? There's intent there. Why drop bodies where people have been searching nonstop, like the guy in Austin? That's a form of taunting. So I know. And a lot of victims aren't found. There's some guys that are never found. Bryce Borka in Minnesota, he was a big case last year. Something's happening to those guys that's different than everybody else. Ain't good.
What about like people when they have like different water in their lungs? What would you think that's from?
That's a great question. Gosh, so many victims are said to be drowning and they don't have any water in their lungs. I've read so many cases about that. I think.
Oh no, I'm talking about like they were like, let's say they were in fresh water but had salt water in there. I don't know if it's exactly that, but like there's situations where the water in their lungs doesn't even match the water that they found.
I've read about that, Nick, but I haven't seen any in a really long time where the bacteria was different water inside the lungs than maybe in the water found. I mean, no, so many times now you want to go into pooling of the blood where the body has been posed, and there's pooling in different positions that were obviously moved. That happens a lot.
Sure.
On the lung situation, I believe it was Jason John's autopsy that his lungs were actually underweight even for normal lungs, if just as a person, not even affiliated with water. And so when you see something like that, Jim, what does that bring to mind? When the lung weight collectively and as an individual lung is far underweight than normal lung tissue.
Gosh, I have no idea. That's a new one. Who could be from, maybe I'm just speculating, but who knows what's being done to them. But so many of these deaths ended up being inconclusive, not drownings, and you can only speculate what's happening or how they get an inconclusive death.
Wow, some of them are like actually like they're not even saying if they drowned or not too.
Oh yeah,
he was.
Go ahead.
Crazy.
That's just wild.
That is crazy. What about any kind of links to social media, like in terms of an affiliation with like Grindr, Tinder, anything like that?
Yes. Not something I've been able to discuss because it's not really a place to discuss it on my Twitter, but I have definitely been targeted on Twitter by people that only have profiles with gay porn, gay actors. In fact, I took a screenshot of one recently, and he was that person's been suspended now. Find that suspicious, but they brought up 3 cases in Illinois, and this was after one of, I forget what case was going on, but they said that I wonder what happens to these 3 guys. And he was like a porn star, and it sounds crazy, but you would look at his followers, and it's pretty interesting. That's happened time to time when there's a big case. Not saying it's connected. I've just something I'm monitoring that I still find suspicious. Why? And there's been other gay connections to all of these crimes. In fact, a lot of the victims are bi or gay. Not all, but there's a good percentage of it. These people hate gay kids just as much as they hate frat kids. I hope people are listening right now.
Well, I could almost probably in my opinion, from things that I have come across. And I mean, I understand it, and unfortunately, that's how the people feel. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but there are people who may even know that the drowning victim, the victim may have been gay and still don't want to come out and say it.
Oh, for sure.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Unfortunately, even then, it's like, you're kind of hindering maybe people looking into other avenues when you don't want to come out and admit that. But I do think that might even be going on more than probably would even know, because you're having people who just, no way, there's never going to be anything said about them being gay or bisexual.
Or no one's ever said anything about them before. Right. And they're still young men.
Yeah, or they never even admitted it to anybody anyway.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. Except for maybe 1 or 2 people. In fact, multiple cases I've been involved, that's been the case where the mom or dad is, well, we hope, some people say he was gay, and they're embarrassed, and it's sad. They want to ask more questions, but they also don't want to ask more questions, just like you just said. There's definitely something going on. There's a connection there for sure. And
I
so
even wonder
many.
if it's the secrecy.
What's that?
I wonder if it even is the secrecy behind it. The victim's already kind of in the closet.
That may be, because there's definitely an element of social media stalking that's going on across most, if not all, these cases. Not specifically to Austin necessarily, but there. And I'm sure Jim knows about these 3 cases that I'm referencing out of Brooklyn, New York last summer. There was 3 men out of the same electronic dance music club in Brooklyn, New York, that all went missing, and 2 of them were found in the creek dead nearby the club. The other one was apparently survived a kidnapping, but he got into a fake Uber. But the mere fact that 2 of these men were medical doctors and the other one was a Wall Street trader tells me that these men aren't just drunk stumbling out of an electronic dance music club in Brooklyn, New York. These men are being stalked to this electronic dance music club and being victimized upon leaving, because there's no way you're going to randomly get out of 3 victims last summer within like a 6-week period. You're going to get 2 medical doctors and a Wall Street trader, and they're all 27 years old. It's just not. It's not reasonable.
You're right. Absolutely.
You know what this almost reminds me of, as crazy as it sounds? I guess the amount of damage done isn't the same, but it almost could this be as detailed as how they got people in Hostel? Were they even persuaded to go to the rave, to go to that club, so then they could pick? When does the whole how does the whole thing start, or is it all just random people at that spot? You know what I'm saying?
Random.
I think if it's targeted, you have to wonder how many people are involved to get this person to where they need them.
Absolutely.
It's targeted because, like the Riley case, these people know where the cameras are. These people know where the CCT cameras are in the city that work, and where blind spots are, and people are herded to that specific spot. And if it's not perfect, then they walk off, and they don't take the victim. And this is why they haven't been caught. And I think that's a big part of it, that there's a reason why so many engineers are being abducted and murdered, why so many victims are engineers, and we're just missing a piece. You know,
Jim, to the whole point of being targeted, and I agree with you. I think they are being stalked, targeted, and they are actually somewhat, picked out ahead of time. But then I think about the case with, and I know we covered this extensively in part 4, but I think of the case of Jonathan Honey, whose dad was pretty much he had the arsenal of the entire intelligence, U.S. intelligence, under his thumb. How did that happen? And how does he not have an idea of what's happening if he sits so high up on U.S. intelligence? How could you not know what's happening?
It seems to be
Does
the
that
bigger
make sense?
No, it does for sure. It seems like the bigger the law enforcement, the more clueless they are in these cases, and that's why it's mostly local. It needs to be attacked locally to really get to the core of the stuff. And The Wire is one of my favorite shows. There's an episode of The Wire where they're tracking cell phones anonymously, and that needs to be done. And I don't understand, like, that technology exists, right? There's only a certain amount of IP addresses from a phone that are in a certain area that can be tracked and are being tracked with cell phone towers, and that's not being followed up on. It's not. And if it is, then they would bust these people. But they're using Snapchat. I'm positive of that. I mean, the case of Caleb Harris down in Corpus Christi, he's a victim right now. I've said that since day one. He vanished right before Riley. That was at a time that when Riley and both of them, like, there seemed to be a call that goes out, and you will see victim, 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 and it's like one after another, and all the cities that are doing this, and it's all at the same time, and you can almost see and that's what happened with Caleb, and he was using Snapchat, and I think that's part of it. Other things too. We're not missing they're using Grindr. I know we've seen that where people are lured. They also, some crimes are random, but you don't think I think not very many of them are. And these people are hunting at places that are undetected, they're able to be under the radar because of people are drinking and partying, like at concerts or sporting events. These are or festivals. These are all places that are hunted by these people, where people disappear. No one asks a question. And if they do ask a question, say, he was doing drugs. Oh, never mind.
Do you even think it's to the point to where they even pick areas they know that, like, surveillance or like video cameras is even less?
100%.
I thought that too.
Yeah. But they make mistakes, though. And again, people aren't even looking. And in fact, the case of Christian Pugh, I know for a fact that the police were looking at the surveillance film of the wrong days. They should have been looking the day he was dumped. They're looking at the days he disappeared. And there has to be where he was dumped on the Colorado River. There are tons of cameras right there. They caught that car. No one's looking. That's happened in New York, too. People going over a bridge that would have to be on camera. Same thing in Austin. That are over. There's cameras of every car that goes over there, but no one's even looking because it's just an accidental drowning.
I've never thought about actually checking for around the time the body showed up. That's
right.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the middle of the night. These guys are working. All these crimes happen between like 1:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning.
When the Rotary Club sands the beaches.
It's them.
That they sanded Gilgo Beach, so I found that interesting.
I've been there before.
I actually don't live too far away from it. Yeah,
that's
when
nice.
When I go to the beach, I normally go to Tobay or Gilgo.
I was just up on business there one time. I didn't have no idea what that would even become. I've never even been interested in that. I mean, of course I've seen that, but what a small world. So many crazy people in the world. I get upset when people want to talk about monsters, make believe monsters, because there's no such thing. Humans are those monsters.
When you look at these cases, Jim, in these cities, is there a commonality to these cities? And I'll preface it by saying it seems like there was, and we talked about tech, my theory of tech, but it also seems that Austin has exponentially increased in its cartel activity. And I don't mean cartel dealings. I mean actual cartel people living there, and it being a hub and an actual like pivot place for them.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I've actually heard that's been whispered about here in Georgia, because where all the murders were in Georgia is a place that, is whispered to have the cartel there. It's a main distribution center. Some of these cases have had drugs involved in them in some ways. Some of the Georgia cases, I don't know about other cases, but, again, money's flowing, getting money from somewhere. These crimes are happening in the middle of the night. These are not people who are working at the post office 8 to 5. These are people who work night jobs. But, one commonality is that a lot of these places are college towns, not just big towns. In fact, I can name off so many college campuses that have victims, down here that people don't even know about. Clemson, the University of Georgia, University of Alabama, Florida State, University of Miami, Austin, right? I mean, Utica, New York. Utica, New York is one of the things that people don't talk about. And they killed so many people there, these same people, and they got away with it. And they tried to blame it on suicide and tried to say these kids were jumping off of a gorge. This is over 15 years ago in Utica, New York. Okay. And
you're talking Utica or Ithaca, Jim? Is it Ithaca?
Ithaca. I'm sorry. Ithaca. Yeah. I'm a Southerner. Shows what I know.
No worries. I know the case you're talking about. I know the event you're talking about because one of the local professors there, it is a big college town. That's really all that's there. You have University of Ithaca and you have Cornell University. I think it was one of the professors from Cornell that had take notice of all the random, what he was referring to as random college deaths. And then he took notice of all the mounds. It was an anthropology professor. He took notice of all the mounds in that town that these deaths were occurring in and around. He didn't really pose the correlation or say that these two things are correlated, but was just saying like, isn't that weird? But yeah, there was a high volume there, right? There was a number of folks that drowned in golf course retaining ponds and on golf courses,
creeks and golf courses.
Creeks, yep.
And there's a gorge there where they kept finding people thrown off the gorge and at the bottom, and that's
they put up a net, didn't they? Wasn't that the solution the town came to? We'll put up a big net, but that still didn't stop the problem.
They put up a net, and the murders just moved, and they moved to a different spot, and nobody asked any damn questions. That's absolutely disgraceful, and that's the type of stuff that makes me do this, because that is so evil, and I can't accept that. I really can't. I mean, yeah.
I agree with you. It was pretty preposterous because it was, taking, obviously professors are taking note of it. Students were obviously taking note of it because their classmates were dying in some rather high numbers, considering you don't expect your classmates, 9 or 10 of them to commit suicide during one school year, which is what was occurring there at the time.
People coming open the bars. I'm drunk, coming to go jump off this thing. One time I can understand. I might die. But when you see it like over and over and over again, that's really what bothers me. That's what was happening in Atlanta, was that men started going missing, and I would email the local news places and say, hey, this guy's been abducted. He's going to be here. And then 3 weeks later, that's exactly what would happen. And people would say, whoa, how'd you do that?
Is there any climatic, I'll just say in Austin, it seems to run the gamut during the spring and fall semesters. And to me, it coincides with festival season. In the summer, you don't really see a whole lot of body recovery, which you would think would be more so because more people head up to Austin during the summer to party. They're out of school, they can freely go and party on Rainy or 6th Street or whatever. And you don't see that many bodies being discovered or floating in Ladyburg during the summer. But then again, it's like extremely too hot in the summer to even be doing anything. And so you do see like a trend occurring almost between February to May, sometimes maybe even bleeding over into June. But then you see it pick up around October into November.
In school. Yeah. Yeah. I see victims year round. I do
Okay.
see it get busier around the holidays,
Okay.
or when festivals are for sure being hunting grounds, because I've posted victims in Austin that were victims from festivals that disappeared.
Mhm.
I don't know how many, but there's been a couple. But it's year round, and it's not just in Lady Bird, as you know. It's
Right.
it's at there was a bridge there, Pennypacker
Oh, yeah,
Bridge.
yeah,
There's been
Pennypacker.
victims there. There
That's
was
a
a
huge
Texas
bridge.
A&M student who was a victim there last year. In fact, right about this time, and he had just graduated college, and they said he committed suicide. I've seen that a couple times too. Again, no one even questions it because they say, "Oh, he was really stressed," even though the area where he was found you would have seen his body the first day, not weeks or days later. And again, it's really all over. And this summer there were a lot of bodies dropped in Austin by like the dam.
Yeah,
Longhorn
that's what I was
Dam.
going to say. Up northwest of the city, right? By about 20
Oh,
miles.
over by what is it called? Lakeway.
There's been multiple bodies there by the dam.
Sure.
Lake Austin. Lake Austin.
Lake Austin is
Yep.
another one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's all around. I mean, they go where the cameras aren't, and they know that. And it's one thing I've been pretty outspoken about the people in Austin. Again, none of my business, but I feel like it's a mistake to put people's energy and time into getting more cameras downtown, because it's perceived safety. The murders will just move. They'll just move to another part of Austin. I promise you. That's exactly what happened in La Crosse. And they just moved to another town. They just moved to the next town over. And that's why it's better, instead of wasting people's time and money, talking about more surveillance that's not going to help. It'd be better off if we all just admitted what's really going on and stop, acting like it's crazy to point out that there's, over 40 young men have been murdered in Austin in the last 5 years,
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but I will say the ones that to me caught my attention was in 2022 and then 2023 were the ones that caught my attention. But it's funny is that they coincided with, I remember enormous amount of news coverage being on the local news about how backlogged the PD was for rape kits, and that they had found rape kits from like the late 90s that had mold and mildew on them, and that nobody had even processed them or anything like that. And obviously they're going to throw them away because you can't get anything from them at that point. And so you hear all of this, and then on that heel of that news, you start to hear about these bodies. And it's almost like our bodies are the bodies that are recovered being picked out to be showcased on the news, because there's a lot more that are not identified.
Yeah, no, there's a lot. I miss a lot. That's something that's sad. I'll be investigating a case, and then they'll have like stories at the bottom that say, if you like this, you may like this. And there'll be like 2 other stories at the bottom about young men that have disappeared and been found the same way.
Yeah, I remember when I think when we went to go cover this, Lisa had like compiled the list, and it was like over 30, and I was like, wait, what? I thought there was like 6 or 10.
Right.
And I
No,
was,
well,
oh,
you probably
that is-
heard about 6 or
And
10.
that we knew of.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. That's why I got interested in this, was that I had only seen a couple on. There used to be a website, there still is. It's called Footprints by the River's Edge blog, and that's
Yep.
where I got started many years ago. And just being able to see, the victims and read those stories and be able to make the decision yourself. That's why I wanted to do what I do, because they stopped. But the victims, I kept seeing victims in the mail. I mean, in the media, and I wanted to show people. That's the only reason I even do this. I don't want to do this. I just want people to take this seriously, because these are Americans just like us.
Sure.
No matter they're being murdered. That's unacceptable.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's interesting that's been going on, as of late, between the incidents and murders, the incidents of murder in Chicago and in Austin, Texas, is that the legacy corporate media outlets, that the local NBC, ABC, CBS affiliates who don't want to cover these subjects, the newspapers in these towns who don't want to cover these subjects, they're all kind of getting kicked by the wayside by podcasts. Whereas folks like Barstool Sports, who has millions of subscribers, they had interviewed Detective Gannon and his team relative to Chicago drownings, the anomalous drownings going on there, what appears to be obvious murders of a large volume of young men. And then in places like Austin, you have a huge kind of Hollywood stand-up comedian scene that has moved to Austin, along with these recent, kind of tech influx of that city. But some of those guys, I stumbled across the podcast the other day by that fellow Shane Gillis. Never listened to this podcast before. I don't know. He maybe talks about serial killers frequently. I don't know. However, in this episode, he was talking about how they're in Austin. I guess he lives in Austin. How they have a quote unquote serial killer in Austin, at this time. So, when you have huge outlets like that, folks have millions of subscribers. Hundreds of times the eyes and ears on these subjects than what any kind of media outlet can provide. Any national or local media outlet, either one combined, it's still volume exponentially larger volumes of audience with these Barstool Sports or a Shane Gillis podcast relative to any news outlet program.
That's good news. That makes me happy to hear that.
Yeah, I think it is positive.
More people are waking up, but again, it's so bad that it's impossible to make excuses. It's getting harder every single day. There's been so many bodies in Austin. You can't say that these are accidents. There's too many. Keeps happening. Sure. In Chicago, so many. You can't say it. I know so much about Chicago murders too that there's definitely not accidents. Some pretty horrific stuff going on, and they are aggressive. They've gone. Austin and Chicago goes back and forth. I was
going to say that. Yeah, that's a good observation because it seems like Chicago, it's kind of waxed and waned as far as their activity goes. Back in 2000 to 2004 or so, very rampant with these murders. Then they had a downturn there for about 10 years, and then started kind of progressively picking back up around 2014, 2013 to what the current state is today. It seems odd though. Yeah, it is like a back and forth type scenario. It seems like between these cities, it does definitely appear that way.
Definitely communicating. Definitely on the same schedule. Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yep. That's something else that people don't talk about. I mean, this is all people are being trained because the same crimes are committed over and over again. There's a schedule. That's why holidays are worked and why you see cases at the end of the month and certain spots where they know it's safe. I mean, there's a certain level of sophistication. These are not dumb thugs.
Multi-jurisdictional usually it's victims often picked up in one jurisdiction and dropped off and body dropped off in another jurisdiction. So that confuses any investigation immediately because no department likes to work with another department.
Nor will they even discuss, there's a drowning county over, or I think they're both murders. You're fired.
One thing that I noticed, Jim, is that how people are saying some of these forums and as well as kind of local chatter is they concentrate on the singular use of the word serial killer. And it almost seems like they are pushing that that it's a single thing. And when it is so far from the truth, and it almost gives a feel of like it's being pushed and inserted into the zeitgeist so that people think it's just one person and it's so one person's a mastermind. When in fact, it's furthest from the truth. You're talking about a top down entire syndicate.
Oh, for sure.
Go ahead.
Even me as a conspiracy theorist, if you were to tell me that this had to be one person, I'd be like, no, I can't believe this thing. No. I wouldn't even buy it. So sometimes I wonder even handing it out like that to the public is just to be like, yo, really? It's one person? Come on.
It drives me crazy. I mean, there's so many articles written about Austin, Chicago, other places, Houston. I mean, is there a singular serial killer? Folks, a man is not easy to abduct. Even if he, a woman's one thing. Forgive me if I sound so sexist, but women are smaller, men are, soldiers, bigger, and just to carry a man's going to take two people. I mean, and to drive a car without being seen, and we're looking at 3 people minimum.
Yeah,
this is minimum, and it's more sophisticated than that. I think. I mean, there's a lot of we keep talking about Riley Strain, but there's a lot of cases where you could check and go down this timeline where people might be involved, and it's multiple times.
Well, it's kind of like a go-to trope where there's maybe a murder or a misadventure. And then right away, this serial killer, maybe it's a serial killer, which they recently changed the definition of from more than 3 to more than 2. which I thought, wow, they really want to lump everybody into that, put a label on that. And we're chasing one guy who killed 11 or 12 people all by himself. They seem anymore with all the crime stuff that I follow, it's almost instantaneous. If there's more than one death, which is not wrapped up quickly for whatever reason, there's a serial killer afoot, takes everybody's attention toward one person, puts the fear on one person who is elusive and usually gets away with it. And then that shuts down every other avenue of inquiry into what else is really going on. And I also wanted to just flip back to Chicago, if I may, for a minute. When I first started doing crime astrology, the early 2000s, I was trolling the papers and I was looking for cases so that I could do a horoscope and try to see if I could understand what happened to the person. You know, were they murdered? Were they going to come back? What happened? And I recall distinctly men going missing in Chicago. And one, it was very, very sad. It was a young college kid, and he was at a party where they were all drinking. He was on some school trip where he was staying at, I think, the Sheraton in Chicago.
I remember.
And yeah, Jesse Warren Ross was his name. He left the Sheraton out a back way, which faced a highway, which then was on the Chicago River. And it sounded so likely that he ended up there through some misadventure. And he was never found. They claimed to have trolled the river for him. I don't know. But there was him. And then there was another guy who went out to a bar and never came back. And it never dawned on me all this time that early on, this is around 2007, 2009. And now looking back after doing Smiley Face now, I'm like, oh my God, I was looking into these cases before I even knew they were cases relative to this. And they were really mysterious, but there was just something really foul afoot. And to one more point I want to make, when I was trying to find a pattern in the Smiley Face cases that we covered over those 4 episodes, the one consistent pattern I did find was misadventure by the medical examiners. Every single one of them was funky. There was something wrong with every one of them, because I was trying to find what linked these cases besides the fact that we know it's a massive plot afoot. It was the medical examiners. There was something compromised about every single one of them. So yeah, it all fits together. Now, years later, I'm seeing that, gee, I was covering Smiley Face before I knew Smiley Face existed. So just to enlighten you, also in the crime research I've done, there is a very strong connection between Texas and Chicago. It used to be Dallas and Chicago. Now it's moving around. It's gone to Austin, but there have been so many connections. I would go back to JFK assassination. I would go back to the Richard Speck murders that I covered in one of the books I wrote. Definite connections between those. And they also triangulate with New Orleans most of the time. So nothing, I don't believe Smiley Face has come to New Orleans yet, but I would not be surprised.
No, they have.
Oh, they have? Okay.
There's been a couple. No,
Philadelphia, Baton Rouge as well.
Okay.
Gulfport,
all right,
Mississippi.
No surprise there.
New Orleans, people leaving like a concert, like a dead concert or a jam band, stuff like that. New Orleans disappeared. Not as many as you would think.
But there's plenty of bodies of water there. I mean, there's plenty of water places to drop people off there.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah, you know, somebody had mentioned in the chat before, and I was going to ask. Well, there was 2 things I wanted to ask. One, it's something I've actually thought is a possibility. Somebody had asked traveling bands.
Oh yeah.
You know, I do think that could be possible sometimes.
I've thought about that, but the problem with that is that so many of these people they vanish for a certain amount of time, you know, and then are brought back to where they vanished. So that would be impossible for the band to leave and then bring them back. Just my 2 cents. Not saying, you know, this is so big, so forgive me. I'm not saying that's not true, but I have thought about that. But it seems every crime scene I've ever been to where these guys have been found, these are all places that only locals know. These are not out-of-towners. Doesn't seem that way. These are under the radar places that these guys, they know where the cameras are. They know how to be able to get down to the water. Not people out of town just winging it. My opinion.
And then I saw somebody else. You kind of like almost answered it, I think, with what you just said. Now, somebody was saying they think it's like kind of like very local.
I definitely think it's local. These are local crimes. We need people working these cases locally, and own your state and put pressure on law enforcement and politicians that this is not acceptable because nobody's doing it. There's a few people. Dash, in Austin is doing a great job. He's putting pressure on local law enforcement and city hall. That's what people need to be doing. No one's holding them accountable. People are just swallowing, the narrative and moving on.
Did you know if any of them? Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, just about to come back to BD when she mentioned the medical examiners. It's not just Austin, and I was trying to make sure that I had this correct. But when we covered the ones in Ohio with JJ, some of the medical examiners there that participated in these autopsies of the people that we covered actually have been high profile Emmys. I believe it was Lindsay Thomas that was one of them, and she was I believe she was a state expert witness in the Derek Chauvin murder trial. And then she was also involved in a couple of other high profile trials as a state expert witness. And so and then you keep going back into some of these medical examiners, and they have a very, very suspicious history.
I'd love to do some more research on that with you. I would just like to see if you could just show me. I have to see stuff to understand stuff, but
Absolutely.
I would love to just see what links up, because if it's about hotspots, there are certain places that are obviously, like Austin, not equal like the others. So thank you.
And I'm not saying it's like only ME driven. I think it's syndicate. I think everybody's on the take that is on the take.
Yeah. That's an important factor, though, you bring up, Lisa, because you have to have the ME in the bag, so to speak, to sign off on, on this being an accident, no foul play.
See, that was something I find interesting with Brian Kohlberger's case. The ME was in the Lions Club.
I'm glad you brought that up.
The Lions Club is associated possibly with the Rotary Club with some of the shit going on in Austin. And right there, you're going to get your ME again, possibly, maybe. I don't know.
So I'm glad you brought up Kohlberger, and people don't like us talking about this, but I can't help but bring up that there were 2 accidental drownings in the same town of Moscow. And one of them was a friend of the 4 victims. And he was at a frat party, I think 3 or 4 months before those 4 were murdered. And he disappeared. Okay, thank you very much. There's been 2 victims there. People don't like talking about this. I don't think Brian acted alone. But I think there's a connection. I do. I think Brian Kohlberger is much more is involved with the people who's into this, because I'm telling you, that's a small town. We have a picture of the victim found in the creek from accidental drowning. He was friends with the 4. We have a picture of him at the murder house. There's too many connections. There was another victim in 2012. Go ahead, JJ, please.
Oh, they were at the same party, right? Hudson Lindau was at the same party with the victims in May, the night he disappeared.
And he was an accidental drowning. Hey, so guess what? So I wanted to get the police report. So I went through the right channels. I was denied for Hudson's autopsy. Police report. Why? It's just an accidental drowning. Why?
Yeah.
Right.
No, you're right. That's a very small town. They have a very like Twin Peaks environment going on there. A lot of conflicts of interest amongst the authorities. I'll tell you that much.
Something's going on. A lot of smoke. I mean, I would never say anything because I don't want people to, not listen about these victims. But the fact that he was friends with those guys and he wound up in a creek and people were questioning, I just don't see how 4 people could be murdered by one guy with a knife. I just never have. But it would make sense that bigger people. Go ahead.
And one of the girls, I believe, was supposed to move to Austin, wasn't she?
Correct.
Or she was from Austin.
Whoa.
No, she was going to Austin in January for an internship.
Yeah. Whoa.
I believe with the Eco Health Alliance or one of the subsidiaries to Eco Health Alliance.
Right.
Whoa.
Wow,
interesting.
A
lot of smoke.
That is weird. That is some really weird stuff.
Same party? The creek, I've seen a picture of the creek where Hudson was found. It's like 6 inches of water.
Yep.
No way. No.
Wow.
Yeah. This is so much bigger than people understand. It's in our face too. That's something we just haven't put all the pieces together, but it's a matter of time.
What is your opinion on possible? Like when I mentioned that I thought, maybe like secret societies might be used kind of as like henchmen or involved. Do you think that's quite possible? Because I could see that. I saw someone bringing up in the chat, which is another question I do want to ask after this. They were kind of asking if there was like local, national, like something that would be nationwide, but would be like kind of like local all over the place for like tech and something else. But like I was thinking, I mean, technically, when I was bringing up like the Lions and the Rotary Club, that would fit in as well.
Those are great examples.
It does. I've always thought these people are true believers, which is why people don't get ratted on, and that the people doing this really believe in what they're doing, which is why it's allowed to keep being trained, and why people don't roll on each other, and why there's many cases that there's been $150,000 reward in these huge cases, and they don't get one tip. Why? Because it ain't about the money.
Yep.
Right. And these people are true believers.
Spot on there, Jim. I think it's definitely a cult mentality. I mean, not necessarily conflate the two subjects, but I think the same mentality can be seen in the law enforcement authorities in the state of Indiana relative to the Delphi, Indiana murder case that's been ongoing, and the man on trial for those murders, Richard Allen. I mean, there's so many breaking of protocols with the argument presented by his own attorneys that there was this cult of what they were calling Odinists, being involved in suppressing the rights and of Richard Allen, which I think there's a pretty strong argument to be made there. The guy was being held in a state prison under charges, and he'd been moved secretly numerous times and abused, etc., by people that were openly wearing occultist patches on their work uniforms inside the prison. So I think if you apply those kind of same standards to some of these other states, and where you're saying it's for the cause, I think that is the cause right there. That's an example of how some of these power centers of authority in certain states can get taken over by these cultists who do things for the cause, and it's not about money. So no one's going to turn on each other.
Nope.
Well, how do we not know that some of the other deaths that occur in the city are people that were going to rat?
I agree.
To speak.
I agree.
Sure.
Because at least in Austin, when you hear of deaths, you hear it's majority Hispanic. Granted, everybody in Texas predominantly is Hispanic. I'm just going to say it. I'm Hispanic, so I can say it. But the thing is that you hear of like somebody was in a truck and all of a sudden they ended up in the lake and they were dead, and it looks like they were beaten or bound or whatever, but they were in their truck. To me, that sounds cartel-like. That sounds very MO of cartel-like. And it almost is like, how do we know that one guy wasn't going to come out and say, or he told his girlfriend, or he told somebody, and all of a sudden now he's, swimming with the fishes on that. But
that's a great point. That's happened in the Delphi case. Numerous folks have died in that case as well, just surrounding deaths that seem to be connected, elements connected to that case. Yeah, I mean, I think that probably is more prevalent in a lot of these smiley face killer instances throughout the different cities than what's currently known. But yeah, that's a great point.
Definitely more of an initiation than a robbery. That's something I deal with constantly, where people thought like Riley was robbed, or his cards removed. People don't even use these people's cards or money. People's money's on them. I mean,
yeah.
There you go. I'm Texan too. Yes. But secret societies, that was another thing, is you see enormous amount of secret societies along the Colorado River, along Ladyburg Lake. You see Scientology, you see all of the Masonic orders, whether it's Lions Club, Rotary Club, you see obviously Masonic lodges, but you also saw, which is now closed down, Temple of Set, and you have two of the major high priests that used to be part of the Temple of Set living in Austin. Not to say that they're affiliated. This is an accusation, but you do see that type of.
There was a lot of, I would say, cult and occult orders out there.
Yes,
definitely.
very much so.
Yeah, you had Scientology, you had the OTO, you had the Temple of Set, you had the Masons. I think the Elks, Lions. Like getting into stuff like that. They're still kind of masonry based.
But their actual head, like where they meet, is usually along the river. I'm not saying it's riverfront property, but it's predominantly found in that one area. And that area is expensive. So it's not like, oh, well, this was a location we found an opening. No. You had to be paying high dollar for that rental fee.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, I would just say that there's so much smoke when it comes to holidays and that are celebrated by the occult. I don't know if that's involved, but there seems to be a lot of thought that goes into summer solstice, victims that are found then, the changing of the seasons, the end of the month, every single holiday. I mean, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween, New
Year's
Year's,
Eve.
all big. New Year's Eve, all big, hunted, worked holidays where people are organized out looking for victims. And I mean, it happens every year. It's been happening every year for 20 years.
Yeah, for sure. And I think to speak to some of the comments we made earlier about the national media attention on the subject, where, kind of framing it as, is there a serial killer, and kind of, putting it in a light that, like, to make it seem ridiculous and like one person is doing all these things. One thought I've had in relative to the dating apps, specifically the gay dating apps, that some victims like Dakota James or Joey LaBute have been identified as using at the time of their disappearance. I have some thoughts on those subjects, relative to how they're continuing to frame this whole, like, national enterprise of smiley face killer deaths. And I think you can look at some of those details and see it's the messages are coming from the same people that own the gay dating apps. For example, one outlet that likes to frame this whole, is there one serial killer kind of thing, and kind of make it look ridiculous that any one person or group could be doing these murders, is the Daily Beast. And the Daily Beast is owned by the same company that owns these gay dating apps, this interactive, I think it's the IAC. It's owned by a very shady owner. And I believe that they have a Clinton or two on the board there, just, not to get too political, but regarding the occult nature of the Clintons, which I think is often overlooked within the political power structure of this country, is they're a very occult oriented, political power couple. And their right hand, John Podesta, got outed as what appears to be a hardcore Thelemite in his email release back from the WikiLeaks. So when I see circumstances like that, where one of the main outlets leading the front is diminishing any reasonable person to look at the smiley face killer phenomenon, being the Daily Beast, and they're owned by the same corporation that owns a number of these a large volume of dating apps, including the number of the gay dating apps that were identified that some victims were using when they disappeared. I find these circumstances to be kind of ridiculous that more questions aren't asked along those lines. Like, why is it the same people that own these gay dating apps, why aren't they doing more to help out with the victimization of some of these young men? And why are they simultaneously bad mouthing this entire phenomenon in their media outlets? It's a strange set of circumstances, I think, that requires more folks to pay attention to. Who's generating these ideas around the subject, and what benefit do they have? And a corporation like the IAC folks, they seem to have some benefit between owning the gay dating apps and then diminishing any discussion of it through their media outlets. I think it's a strange confluence of events, but it seems shady. Definitely suspect.
Just great points. Great points. I haven't heard anybody say that.
Yep.
Really amazing.
It's definitely strange, for sure. Thanks.
Jim, I'm going to bounce back to the ME situation. Have you, because you indicated that you've seen some of these autopsies. Now, granted, this is subjective because it's at the mercy of the MEs, but have you come across any the missing organs, tissue, or anything like that?
Never. Never seen any missing organs. Only thing I have seen is blood that has been completely drained in a few cases. I can confirm that. And also missing toe, missing finger. That's really it. Where that's been, maybe the victim disappeared, but they found a missing toe, and that's it. But law enforcement won't even talk about that.
Do you know if it was a specific, like, is it more than once, and was it the exact same digit?
No, this is two separate times. Okay. Why that was victim, but maybe it's only because I knew inside information, right? I mean, maybe they're not telling. The missing toe was recently, and it was last year, and the police never.
It was a big toe. I mean, was it like
pinky
was it
toe?
Pinky?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it was next to the Mississippi River, and the police never admitted that, and they also never admitted that they, supposedly they had his phone, but they wouldn't admit to that publicly. A lot of misinformation by the police. This victim, he also had a FaceTime, and he FaceTime and then it went blank like a lot of victims when he was FaceTiming by himself. So he was walking, and there was a light that was helping him FaceTime. Police didn't even want to ask those type of questions. So
It's sketchy stuff. Do you think, do you think law enforcement at some point might be involved in some of these cases?
Gosh,
may not be involved. I'm saying with I guess the actual crimes, just making sure the crimes never get solved correctly.
That's a tough question to ask. I am skeptical. I do think people are involved.
I know that requires a lot, actually. I mean, that really is kind of
there's things about that what you just asked me that I've seen that really scare me. Right? There's been probably over 10 victims that I've seen since I've been doing this that their last contact was with police.
Nope.
And they'd vanished, or people that ran from an accident, ended up being in a river for some reason, but they had long rap sheets, or there's a lot of that. And that definitely scares me. And there's also been people that I've seen that have been tortured that are victims, and that, their families got second autopsies. And a couple of them said, this type of torture looks military trained. So, that's pretty frightening when you start adding some of that stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I have wondered, I do think it's quite possible with some of them. I do think they're involved with because it could kind of be easy. I mean, coming from, I guess, the right person in charge and being persuasive. I mean, you could be like, oh yeah, this was just another drunk drowning. Yeah, let's wrap this up and make this one easy. No reason to go into this.
Yeah,
sure.
Some cop really doesn't want to have to do anything, but it just sounds good to me.
Well, I will say that I've heard from
and you never even thought of anything. You know what I'm saying? No thought of covering anything up. Cop doesn't know anything. It's zero idea. But it was just like, okay.
It's top down for sure. And, I've heard rumblings that there's been so many murders in Austin that there are people on the police force that are angry at that's what's being told, the official narrative, even though they know that it makes them look foolish and it's hurting them. So I've heard that.
It cuts down the paperwork.
Do you think that there's a possibility of murder for hire, especially with these military mercenary type style?
Oh yeah.
Maybe. These people are so, this is so done with such stealth and precision. Maybe.
Yeah, I think there certainly has to be. In my mind, there has to be some element of that. Some highly trained, not necessarily military, but military trained personnel, military-like trained. Some, be private. We have a whole. Given the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, there's been a whole birth of corporate military, operations, be it Blackwater or otherwise. Of course, there's Whack and Hut. There's a long history of shady activities of the same variety of for hire mercenary type folks who have, corporations with large government contracts that employ these type of characters. However, my mind, in my military career, as a law enforcement, spent most of my time in the Air Force and military police out of my 20 years. And I, for the first 6 or so, I was a SWAT team leader, and, training, I will say, getting any team of folks to train to do anything in on a high risk environment like that. I mean, it's, it takes a lot of training, a lot of expertise amongst your team, trust amongst your teammates to execute such an operation as removing, surreptitiously removing a man from a bar, despite whether or not he's drugged or not. That still takes some precision. So there's obviously some element of, in my mind, of that activity within the smiley face killer phenomenon. There's some sort of military style operations present. There's just, again, it's these are not fly by night operations. These are people that they're inducting into their missions, their operations, and then training them to complete these things. So there's probably some varying degrees of expertise, between like the whoever's baiting the person in versus an extraction team versus whoever's serving as a lookout. So there's probably, you start maybe with the surveillance and the lookout team, and then you work your way up to the extraction team, where there's certainly an element of precision and military-like training going on.
Wow. That seemed to just what happened in the Strain case. Literally.
Absolutely, yeah.
Verbatim.
Yep, that's the way I think it went down. He had someone tracking him. There was an extraction team ready to go, and you had somebody. The bait was the woman telling the bouncers, "This guy's got to go." The extraction team is ready to go. You already have someone providing lookouts to know which way you're removing the person, and you're doing, and they're communicating as it goes. So that's what I'm saying. It takes. I'm very familiar with what it takes to get people to train in these environments and communicate and move and whatnot and execute these plans fairly flawlessly. Per the terms as far as staying out of the sight of the surveillance cameras. So yeah, these are not folks who just take this lightly. This is a very serious. These are very serious folks about what they're doing.
Yeah, bud, absolutely right on the money. That's exactly what happened to Riley, because they knew where the blind spot was after the bridge, and that's why he wasn't on the camera anymore after that bridge, because when he walked into that trap, they acted like a spider, pounced, gone, over.
Yep.
Yeah, he just like disappeared.
Yeah. I hate to run, but I actually you guys are great. I appreciate you having me on so much. I love talking to y'all about this.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, I think we definitely asked. Well, there was more questions asked than I could have imagined. So
I'll come back. I'll come back if you allow me.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, we could always talk about this again for sure. Real quick, do you just want to? I mean, you don't want to advertise anything for yourself?
Nothing to advertise. I mean, I'm not selling anything. I'm going to write a book eventually. We're talking about politics. No one's attacked it politically. I may run for public office eventually, and this is going to be part of my main campaign in Georgia. And how our society has to have a tough conversation, and about more of failure of government. By not allowing us we're paying all these taxes, and you can't even keep our college kids safe. And you're going to lie to me about it. So no, something has to be done.
We're paying you to lie and not actually do your job. I think that's some shit.
You shouldn't be. People shouldn't be we shouldn't allow people to be predators on our kids. That's one of the things that's always driven me crazy, is that these young men literally are like in the beginning of their life that their parents have worked so hard for, blossoming like a flower, and so much hard work, and somebody swoops in and absolutely destroys that. That bothers me. That we have to stop these people.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good point too. A lot of these are like, they had the whole lives ahead of them,
just starting.
Best and the brightest. Overwhelmingly,
families are destroyed. Families are destroyed. You'd never get over that. That hurts our country. This is a slow-moving terrorist attack. Somebody's doing this to us.
Imagine it was like a slow-rolling eugenics.
Maybe. Maybe. Somebody's funding it, though. Somebody's sitting back and running this whole show. So
definitely weird. Jim, again, thank you very much for coming on. Like I mentioned before, he has done stuff with William Ramsey. Maybe you can go check it out. I'm sure his name's playing the title. Real quick, JJ, remind everybody where they can find you again.
JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD. Thanks again for the invite. Jim, great chatting with you. Again, been following you on Twixter for, I think it's probably closer to 8 years now. And
long time.
And if I could plug anything, I would plug folks of the interwebs to follow you on there to understand the full scope of these drowning murder phenomenon. Because when I first started looking at it, I know following your Twixter timeline of all the different cases you post there and you track, that really opened up my perspective to the scope of the actual phenomenon, as far as not just including the kind of the standard white college kid victimology. Really looking at what you've put together there on your timeline really shows the full scope of what's going on here, and it is very tragic. And I think you framed it right. It is terrorism. It's chaos and terrorism. That's the way I look at it. So yeah, I think that's the best way to look at it.
Thanks, JJ. Appreciate all the support. Sure. I mean it.
Yes, and real quick, Jim, just let people know your Twitter handle. again?
It is Drowning Victims at Smiley Face Cult.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And real quick, BD, let everybody know where they can find your stuff again.
Star Sleuth on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram, and I have a Linktree, which should be below.
Yes. Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you very much. I always appreciate it. Do you want to plug your Twitter or any of your things for people to get in touch with you?
Twitter, Solis Lisa. Instagram, Lisa Solis.
Awesome. Thank you all again. Thank you, everybody in the chat. I had a bunch of people in there. I appreciate all the chatter, all the thoughts. There was good questions in there. I appreciate that for sure. And that is the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.